Hi, welcome to the open air.
Hi.
So we are here to discuss weather today. Whether or not we're going,
No.
not that kind of weather.
No. Different spelling.
That may weather poorly.
Something like that, yeah.
Yes. So Halloween's coming.
Yes.
Do you know? Did you hear about the witch that had triplets?
Triplets.
Yes.
Okay.
They didn't know which witch was which. Ooh. Sorry.
Which was which is which?
Right. So, yes, I have lots of dad jokes.
Many.
I do this a lot. We went out to eat last night, and I had some dad joke banter with our waitress, which was pretty cool.
That was fun. She kept coming back with more.
She had some good ones, actually. A couple that I hadn't heard. So I was, and a couple of derivatives that were different from ones that I had heard, right? So there was a nice little spin on some of those. But anyway, weather. We had this conversation earlier, and I wanted to get it on a podcast. I wanted to get this on video because I think it's important. And the reason I think it's important, and the Elizabeth and I talked about, is that I want to get back to what we call common sense, right? And having the conversation. So I'm old enough to remember, and I was explaining this to our middle son, back in 1985, and I saw a video about this not too long ago, which has reminded me that global warming was the big, Al Gore and the global warming trend and all this was a big deal. And they were saying that the temperature overall globally had increased 1 full degree over the course of that year on average.
Right.
And so if that trend continued, that would melt the polar ice caps, and Florida would, like, 3/4 of Florida would be underwater, right? Just the higher land down through the center of the peninsula would still be, above the water plane, but, the beaches would be moved in by, several miles, right?
Right.
And which would decrease the amount of land mass in Florida and wipe out, homes and businesses, including Disneyland and all kinds of other stuff pretty significantly, right? And so, excuse me. So anyway, and so that was the news back in 1985, and then you fast forward to today, and so the picture that they had of Florida, and somebody had taken the liberty, and I don't have all this technology yet, but we're getting there. Somebody had taken Florida and overlaid it with the picture of Florida from then, and it's exactly the same, right? So fortunately, weather patterns and whatnot didn't change significantly enough that Florida changed and didn't sink or go into water and everything else. Also, California is still there.
Right.
So, which with the...
Though it's supposed to go underwater because of an earthquake and just,
all the earthquake, California was going to fall into the ocean and be underwater, and
Right.
that obviously never happened either. So, but it's an interesting conversation because Elizabeth said something. Do you remember what you said that inspired me?
That nature finds balance.
Exactly. Nature finds balance. And so, so then with that, 1985, global warming, well, then there was a period of time where they're talking about global cooling because now the climate
next
average,
ice age, yeah.
the climate was starting to cool off, and they were seeing trends that it was getting cooler. And so they're like, oh, it's, now it's getting cooler. And so now the ice caps are going to increase, and, there'll be an ice age and all the, it was going to be horrific.
Either way.
And right. And so, more pandemonium. But it's, so now they're talking about climate change. Oh, well, yeah, sometimes it warms up, sometimes it cools off, but it's changing. And so that's the reason to panic. And now there's greenhouse gases, right? Which is significant. And it sounds really scary when you hear it in the news, right? And so the news has become largely entertainment, right? And it's become dramatic for effect. But like back in the days of Walter Cronkite in the 1980s, he was like matter of fact. He read the news, it was a factual statement, and then that was it. There was no politics, in his thing, right. Or very, very, very small, minuscule portion. It was largely unbiased, and it was just news. Like it, don't like it, whatever. He's just reporting the news. And now it's so biased, right? So there's, I use the analogy of Fox News versus CNN, right? So Fox News is the far right, Republican leaning, news media, and CNN is the far left, Democrat leaning news media. But their entertainment value, and both of them throw in stuff from the other side too, just to keep people thrown off. They're like, oh, see, they're fair and balanced. They're not as biased, and but they are, right? And it's dramatic for effect. But people used to talk about this. Like, we had neighborhood parties. We sat down with friends, and we'd all sit around lounge chairs and just, like, one of the pastimes in my neighborhood was people would sit in front of their garage and just watch traffic go by during the day, like the retired people.
Yep. And
as kids, we'd stop over and we'd go talk to the old people, right? And sometimes they give us a Dr. Pepper or something. And do you know what kind of doctor Dr. Pepper is, by the way?
What kind?
He's a physician. I think we have that effect in there. Can we?
Oh, dang. Oh, that's the applause. There it is.
Yep. Perfect. So, but, so global warming, weather patterns. So in thinking about like the CO2 emissions, right? So cars and, greenhouse gases and that sort of thing. Do you happen to know how much percentage of our atmosphere is the greenhouse gases?
We've talked about this. It's like 0.001 or something.
It's 0.2%.
0.2?
Yes.
0.2.
Well, it was. So I could be wrong, right? Because I'm going back on my memory a little bit, but I believe it was 0.2%, and now it's gone up to 0.3%.
Okay.
So we've gained 0.1% of greenhouse gases
since they started
over a period of time. I don't, like I'm not
over the last decade or something.
I'm not going to pretend that I'm a Scientologist or no, not a Scientologist.
Scientologist, no.
I'm not that either.
No.
That I'm a climate scientist. Wow. I got that horribly wrong on multiple levels.
So many.
I am, I'm not a climate scientist or even a meteorologist, right? Meteorologist. Wow. I just said that. English is not my strongest point today. But I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that?
We went up 0.1%.
Yeah. So we went up 0.1% in the CO2 emissions. And so what is the impact that has on the climate? And I have seen another podcast somewhere. I wish I could name it now because I'm just kind of winging it. That's pilot humor.
Yep.
Right at the moment. But I watched another video where they were talking about that. And so the net result of an increase of greenhouse gases are now the trees use CO2 and make oxygen, right? So now trees have more sort of food in the air to use to make oxygen. So it's better so now trees are greener and healthier and they're making more oxygen. So the net result is going to be nature finds balance. Now there's going to be probably a 0.1 increase in the amount of percent increase in the amount of oxygen in the air. And then they sort of count each other out. Right.
Right.
And again, this is just common sense talking about it with you guys. Cause I think the real thing that I really want to get at with this and the importance is, and we were talking with some of our neighbors last night, is having these conversations, right? So these common sense conversations and discussing, like real discussions with real people,
right? And
just talking about things.
Even if you don't agree. And just
no, you have to agree with me.
Yep.
Right. So we can still. Sorry, I couldn't resist. We can still care about each other and still have respect each other's opinions and still disagree, but there's always common ground, right? Even if we disagree on the global warming, climate change thing, and I largely don't believe that we particularly do, but even if we did, there's common ground. Okay, I can agree to this, and I can agree to she can agree to that. So, but in the middle, right, we both agree that our lives immediately are not seriously impacted by climate change. Right?
Right.
And so that's our common ground. Now, what does the future look like? Can we take steps to make it better? Sure. Yeah, right? Probably. We cut down a tree in our yard. Right, so now that was a big tree. It was probably 100-year-old ginkgo tree.
Right.
And as it turns out, ginkgo trees are beautiful trees. It's one of my favorites. But female ginkgo trees produce a fruit that causes a rash very similar to like poison ivy. That's itchy and spreads.
Yes.
And the fruit, when it falls on the ground and stuff, it smells like dog doo-doo.
Yeah,
it's and so
bad.
I was smelling it in our yard. So we bought this house in 2016 or whatever. But I sometimes in the summer I always noticed that I'd smell like dog doo doo, and I always look at my shoes. I'm like, oh, did I step in that? Right. Oh no, I didn't. Oh, somebody must have, or maybe there's a dog nearby. It just went there. What is that smell coming from? And we finally pinpointed that it was the fruit of the ginkgo tree that was falling in our yard.
Right.
The other cool thing about ginkgo trees, and I'm way off on a tangent at the moment, is all the leaves will decide to fall in the fall at one moment.
On the same day.
Just boom. Like today's the day, and all the leaves come off. And it's a really cool thing to watch. Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, enough about ginkgo trees. They'll last 2,000 to 3,000 years though, so they're one of the trees that have a lot of longevity, and pretty resistant to
a lot of things.
So they're remarkable trees, but male ginkgo trees are far superior to female ginkgo trees.
Yes.
And
then we found out that they can even change gender, which is interesting.
So they're. You know what? I'm not going to go political.
Yeah,
I really want to, but I'm not going to.
Don't go there.
So just imagine amongst yourselves what you think I might have said.
It probably is funnier in their head too.
Maybe.
Like,
comment, and share. Right? Send me your thoughts. And so that got me thinking about, in our conversation from last night is. Now we're getting a little political and we're getting into some hot topic stuff here, but I think it's important to have this conversation. We have a 15-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
And so, this is relevant and stuff. And we sat next to somebody at my son's soccer game, and we were having a very similar conversation, and that's about abortion.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a very hot topic in this political.
It's very emotional. It's very sensitive.
There's a lot of fodder on both sides, right? So you can put up examples on both sides of the issue to dramatically illustrate the reason why their side is superior to the other side, right? But if you look at it, both sides are taking, 1/100th of 1% of the cases and making that seem like the norm in order to justify their position.
Right.
And the reality is, if from statistics class, right? So if you cut off the fringe edges of both sides, right? The reality in the middle is most people generally agree that abortion is bad, except in the case of life of the mother, rape, and incest. Right? Most people, if you look at the real statistics and you cut off the fringes, most people believe somewhere in that range. Yes. Right? And that's worthy of debate. I really like that Trump is saying, we want the federal government out of your life let's put it back at the states, right? Because the closer the government gets to the people, right? So you want your local government the most in charge,
Right.
the state government, and then the federal government, right? Or, even your city and then county and then state and then your region and then the federal government. If you want to go, sorry, I'm getting bigger. The closer the government is to the people, the better the legislation is going to be, right? Because
it's more tailored to the population of that area,
right,
and their needs and their viewpoints.
Iowa is 99% farming, agricultural, right? So when you're looking at laws in Iowa, you've got the city of Des Moines, and then Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, and then maybe the Quad Cities east, and then
Council Bluffs
out west. So those cities are like 1% of the inner city metropolis sort of voters, right? Not 1% of the population, but 1% of the land mass, right? 1% of the agricultural element, right? So 99% of Iowa is rural, agricultural, right, as far as land is concerned. But then, that 1% of land has, a very high percentage. I don't know what it is, but probably closer to 50% of the population, right? So the cities, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, Des Moines, Council Bluffs, and the Quad Cities are very densely populated area where, farms in Iowa, you'll drive a mile for each, farm out in the rural community, right? So there's a lot of space. So it's not densely populated. And so those dense populations have 50% of the voters, but 1% of the land mass. So it doesn't, the politics don't line up with the needs of the state. And so, but state government, right, can sort of sort all that out better than the federal government can, right? Because we're not the same as California. If you've ever been, so even Des Moines being densely populated is not LA. If you've ever been to LA, they're not even on the same scale, right?
Right. Well, and we've had that conversation in regards to Illinois even, where farmers in Illinois have suggested that Chicago be basically its own government.
Like 90% of the voters live in inner city Chicago, right? It's hugely populated.
Yes.
And it's sprawled out. And so you've got a huge amount, I think it's 90%. Don't quote me on that. I don't know that statistic off the top of my head. And I'm sure it changes, but
it's definitely a majority.
It's a very high percentage of the voters are in Chicago, right? So very densely populated urban area with big, huge skyscrapers and everything else. And then you've got rural, southern Illinois, which is akin to Iowa, where you've got this huge rural mass of people, not very densely populated area. And these people don't really feel like they have a voice when they vote because Chicago just so overwhelmingly overshadows them.
Right. So any policies that would benefit the farmers, the people in Chicago are like, well, no, we need money for this. We need money for this. And they lose a lot of funding over it. And so
tons.
So even that, even taking it down to the state level doesn't necessarily solve all the issues either, depending on the state. I would imagine California would have a similar thing because I know Northern California has a lot of the farmland.
Right.
But then you've got San Francisco, LA, and things like that would have very different viewpoints on how things should happen. Right.
Well, and those densely populated, a lot of the problem with California and, Des Moines and the big, if you look at all the densely populated cities, New York is a prime example, Chicago is, those tend to vote blue, and a tremendous amount of funding goes to those because they've got a very large, densely populated voting base, right, that have a very distinct set of needs that are very different than, the rest of the rural state, right? So you've got 1% of the land mass, just as a hypothetical, versus 99% of the land mass, that have a very different set of needs, and
Right.
but the voting population is sort of the opposite. 90% of voters are in 1% of the land mass, and whatever.
Right.
So,
Or, whatever percentages it is. But it's definitely
right.
majority.
But with the abortion thing, right? So I remember back in the 80s, the conversation was about birth control, right? Wearing condoms prevents disease. It prevents and pregnancy and all kinds of unwanted things, right? So if you're
Right.
going to have sex recreationally, then right, use condoms because they prevent.
Well,
So-
and not just that, but being aware of the consequences. Being aware that there are consequences, because I don't think that
Right.
that gets explained as well as it could.
Pregnancy is almost viewed now by the young teenagers and young adults now, the Zennials and even Gen Alpha now, as almost as a disease, right? So we don't want to get pregnant, we don't want to catch pregnancy or whatever, and it's not, right? It's creating a beautiful, wonderful life,
Right, but that's also a very serious thing and not something to.
right? And people generally
tempt fate
tend to keep it
over.
on on the surface, right? They don't really want to have that deep thought about things anymore. And that's kind of what I'm trying to drive with this particular episode is let's have this conversation, right? So I'm not always right, but I believe that my opinion has some valid thought behind it, and I think it's worth discussion, right? And so if your opinion's different, that's fine. Then we'll have that conversation. You can comment, and
Yeah.
and but then somewhere in between there, the middle ground is what we're going to come up with, and that's where we can both agree, and then that's where we start. That's our starting point in our society, right? So you can be Trump versus now it's not Biden anymore, now it's Harris. But when you get into that, it's like, well, I'm not voting for Trump because he's a bad orange man or whatever. Okay, well, that's on the surface. That is not even a worthy discussion. Right? So you can choose to not like somebody, but then what are their policies? Right? So Kamala Harris has said a lot of things that are Marxist and communist in nature. She said a lot of things about taxing the potential capital gains, right? So they call it unrealized gains. So if your house increases in value, even if you don't sell your house, they're saying, well, your net worth has gone up because in theory, right, on paper,
Right.
your house is worth more. So we're going to tax that amount,
We're going to tax you more.
right? But that's kind of that's a really, and they're saying that they're only going to do that to wealthy, but then they're going to redefine that after, that sounds really good for election purposes, but then that's not how it plays out, because the uber wealthy people, they have the money and the wherewithal to change their accounting practices so that it doesn't reflect that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so it always comes back down to the middle class. And that's another topic for another time about how that transpires, but I think it's
Right.
important. But, having that conversation about prevention of pregnancy, right? So there's birth control pills, but now you run the risk of disease, right?
Right.
Because if you're sleeping
Well-
around promiscuously,
Well, yeah, the risk of disease, and you have to take it appropriately, and you have to
Right.
remember to take it.
right?
Like that's part of taking it appropriately.
Yep.
And there's other potential side effects with them as well. It's just pros and cons, weighing that out.
Absolutely, right? And so that's where you need to talk to your doctor, right? And your parents, and amongst your friends and other people. But let's have the conversations, the real hard conversations about, hey, I'm having sex promiscuously isn't really, in the end, it's not the best for your mental health. It's not the best for your physical health. Right? There's a lot of value in, the Christian values of being married to only one person and, only sleeping with that one person. There's a lot of value in that. So whether you want to be a Christian or not, you can recognize the values of those circumstances
Right.
and, appreciate them.
Well, just
for that.
and it's just like we're saying, pros and cons, risks, benefits.
risk versus rewards,
Yep.
right? So,
Yep. So, deciding what's more important, I guess.
right. But, you know, I know when I was young, you know, and I can look back, I'm really not as young as I used to be. But,
You're older than you've ever been. And
Yes.
now you're even older.
wow, I just aged
Yep.
while we were on this podcast.
Exactly.
But, you know, so I thought about relationships differently. And, you know, when I was dating and, you know, what my dreams would be and, you know, it was scary to like settle down with one person. Like, what if I choose the wrong person?
right.
You know, and now I'm divorced. So I can look back and say, wow, yep, whoops.
Yep.
Like I chose the wrong person. But you know what? But now, you know, Elizabeth and I are in a relationship. And so I see the value of being in a monogamous relationship and, you know, discussing things. One of the things that Elizabeth taught me, you were going to say something. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I wasn't.
Her spaghetti is working. So
My spaghetti is working.
yeah.
A
So so there was a book, Men Are Like Waffles, Women Like Spaghetti. So
It's
men
so true.
compartmentalize.
So true.
And women, everything flows together. And so when I bring up new information to her, it's like throwing a meatball in her spaghetti and it just all flows together. And now, it's all,
Right.
whereas, you know, I'll say something and then I've said it. So I've closed
done.
that
The
box.
box is
I've put it
gone.
away. It's gone. I've moved on. I come back in the room and she'll start talking about it again. I'm like, what are you even talking about? Like, I have closed that box and put it away. I have
Right.
no idea. Like, I'm not in there. And she's like, I'm still spaghettiing it out. So it's still interflowing with everything else and
well,
still
and-
like getting sorted.
And the inverse of that is when you've moved on to a new box and I'm still sorting out the spaghetti and
Yeah.
you start talking about something new and it's like, no, wait.
Right. Like, my spaghetti's not there yet. You're adding more stuff to my spaghetti.
Right. I'm still on this noodle. Leave it alone.
Right. So, yeah. But you know, so we've talked a lot about, and you brought this to my attention, right? So, setting expectations, right?
Right. And communicating that.
And communicating them. So if I make an expectation in my head that I, whatever, expect you to.
You want me to make you breakfast every morning.
I do.
I know you do.
You're an amazing cook.
But no, if you just have this idea in your head that every morning I'm going to make an elaborate breakfast.
Right. So if I get up in the morning and I go down and my coffee's not made, I'm like, whatever. But I don't say anything to her. I just sit down in my chair and now I'm sort of frustrated. I'm grumpy about it. She's like, what's the matter? You know? And I'm just like, nothing.
Right.
Well, obviously something's the matter, right? But I just
Right.
sit there and I'm stewing over it. Like nothing's the matter. And then she goes over and pours herself a glass of orange juice, right? And then starts making breakfast. And then she comes in, your breakfast is ready. I'm like, fine,
Right.
come in. So fine. I heard this one time. This is the mnemonic feelings inside not expressed,
Which is
Right.
absolutely true.
which I really like
It's
that, right?
true.
So
It's so true.
that is wisdom. And but if I would have just communicated to her, and we both try to do this, right? So, you know, hey, I noticed you didn't make me coffee this morning, and then she'll be like, oh, well, we were out of coffee, and so it's on order, so I don't have any. Would you like me to go get you some? I'm like, oh, well, now that changes the conversation. Well, I don't
Right.
expect her to like leave the house and go to the store and go buy me coffee. I'm like, I can just stop at whatever the local,
Right.
you know,
The gas station or something.
Caribou Coffee or whatever on the way to work.
Right.
I don't, need. So then that changes the conversation. Now I'm not mad at her. Now I like empathize with her. Wow, she would have made coffee, but we're out. And
Right.
maybe that's on me because I was the one who went to the store last and didn't get coffee because I didn't know we were out.
Right.
So now, right, so creating those expectations in your head and then not communicating them and then being mad because they're not met
Right.
when you never communicated that you had them in the first place is the crux of a lot of issues in relationships, I
Right.
think.
Well, and even to build on that, you said, well, I was the one who went to the grocery store first. I didn't get coffee because I didn't know we had coffee. Well, what if I was mad that there wasn't any coffee? So now you're mad that I didn't make coffee. It can get exponentially worse. It can go further and further back until you're just both mad at each other and you have no idea why you're mad at each other.
Right. And then that
And then you're
snowballs.
fighting about nothing.
So that accumulates. So now you're stewing over the coffee and the going to the store and all these little things. And then I come in and there's a dirty spoon in the drawer when I pull it out, and I'm like, the spoon's dirty. And she's like, maybe if you'd have blah, 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 blah. I'm like,
Right.
why is she so mad over a
Why?
dirty spoon? Right? Like, but that just happened to be the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back,
Right,
if you
right.
will. Where
But-
she didn't even care about the spoon. It was just all these other things that have been festering, and then something, right?
Something.
So her plate of spaghetti was full. In order to put another meatball in there, she needed to unload some spaghetti.
Right.
And I'm really sorry about the spoon.
It's okay. I forgive you.
Thank you.
Sorry about the coffee.
I forgive you. And there's a lot to be said for forgiveness, right? So just
There is.
appreciation and forgiveness, and having that conversation. And they're hard conversations sometimes about hey, there's interpersonal things that we've talked about. And I'm not going to get into every detail of our personal lives, but there are uncomfortable conversations. Abortion can be one of them, and we sit down and have those uncomfortable conversations. Like, hey, what type of birth control do you prefer? What kind of things,
Right.
if you're going to be in a committed relationship, what are your expectations? What, for me,
Right.
and I should communicate my expectations for you. We should just decide that rather than I think one of the mistakes that we tend to make in America today is that we live a lot on of assumptions. Did I
Yes.
say that properly?
We live a lot on assumptions.
I thought that's what I said, but it sounded weird in my head. So I'm thinking about a million things when I'm doing these because I've got like 5 boxes open and I need
That gets messy.
It does. Yep. And so I'm dumping them into her spaghetti while we're doing it. And
Yes.
so I've got 4 boxes in her spaghetti, and some of her spaghetti is getting into my boxes, and there's a meatball. I don't even know where that came from.
Right. It's
and
just rolling across the floor.
why is there Parmesan cheese on everything? I don't get it.
Right.
But I think those are valuable conversations to have, though.
Right. Right. Well, it helps you avoid a lot of, I don't want to say hardship, but just, frustration. And, obviously they're uncomfortable conversations to have, but I think having the arguments are worse.
Well, absolutely.
Right. Talking about something in a place of just having the conversation and trying to understand is far more productive than trying to have the conversation when you're mad about it. Because at that point, there is no more conversation. It's just, I'm right, you're wrong, you need to admit it.
Well, and when you're festering over something, you're angry about it, right? So we fight or flight mechanism kicks in. You get the surge of adrenaline, right? And then you have every desire to win the argument. So you're going to come up with, and some people have really strong memories, and they sort of keep tabs of things. So
Which isn't fair.
My previous relationship, and I've seen this in a lot of relationships, so I'm not calling anybody in particular out so much so as I'm just calling out the idea that, there would be 15 things that I have done in the past where she had set expectations that I had met, but she'd never communicated them, but I never knew that. But then when she get to the point where she's frustrated, all those would come out all at once. You never did this. You never did this. I never knew you wanted me to. And the fatal thing that I've heard said in many circumstances is, if you loved me, you would know. And that is the most unfair statement.
It's unwinnable. It's unwinnable.
It's unwinnable because you can really care deeply about somebody and still not know what they're thinking, right? So you're not, unless you're savant, right, or clairvoyant,
right,
and read their mind, there's no way to know what somebody else is thinking, right? You may know what their likes and desires are, but you still may not know what they're thinking about any particular thing at any particular time.
Right.
And so that's an unfair statement, right? And whereas it's a way to absolve yourself of any accountability in the relationship, right? And push everything off. And so that's kind of that gaslighting thing and the narcissistic behavior that I hope that we're in society going to find ways to get out of, because I think it's prolific.
And unfortunately, the remembering the 15 things, whatever, tends to be something that women do. Generally,
It is. I've seen guys do it though too, right? So, and you know what?
And I'm not sure that all women understand that they're even doing it. Like I've talked
At least
to you,
not
like
consciously.
I have that in my brain, but I try really, really hard to not,
Sure.
because that's not fair. It's not fair for, like, that I'm mad about you
I
over
think
the,
it's-
the
I think
coffee or
both-
whatever, to say, well, why didn't you do this, this, and this, and this, and this too?
I think both genders do it about different things,
I would
right?
agree.
So men would probably tend to do it more about things that are intimate or affectionate, right? And keeping tabs of when or when not things have happened. And women tend to do it in other areas,
Right.
right? Whereas, when I spend time with you, for instance,
Right.
or,
when you did something nice for me or for God, something,
right.
or...
So,
Well, and we've talked about that too, how men tend to be more into the physical aspect of the relationship and women are more into the emotional aspect of the relationship.
right. Yep. And there's a lot of, TikTok and Instagram videos out there that address all these little nuances. But I think overall the conversation is, respect for others. And if you're in a loving relationship with somebody, right, and you're monogamous, it's okay to sit down. In fact, it's essential to sit down and have some of these hard conversations, not operate on assumption. Oh, it's awkward for me to ask you what specific types of intimate things. So I just, try them and,
Right.
they're important conversations, and they're hard conversations because, it's stuff that generally in society, especially in, social media, that sort of, they're awkward things to talk about that we normally don't address. And so they're all kind of taboo or whatever. So we operate on assumptions, we operate on the surface, and we don't really get down in any depth of understanding or,
Right.
I'm not sure where to go with that from here without getting into specific details.
Right. Well, because it's very personal. It's not
Right.
something that you can just go and talk to somebody and say, yeah, this is exactly all the things that we have talked about. Every relationship's different. So it's highly personal, and it's, things that you probably don't necessarily just want to talk about with everyone on the block, because
Well-
that's, an intimate part of your relationship. But just being willing to talk about it with your partner, though, is, I think, very important.
One of the things in the military that I learned, right? So seeing the rest of the world. So I've been to more than 17 countries, and, I've seen real poverty. I've seen real hardship. I've seen the dire effects of communism in countries and corruption, all kinds of stuff. And we're a very wealthy country. And even the poorest Americans live much better than even kings did in the Middle Ages, right? So we are a country of immense and enormous wealth, but most people feel broke, right? So I'm living paycheck to paycheck, and I don't have any money in the bank. So we don't feel wealthy. We
Right.
feel stressed. We feel impoverished. A lot of that's pressure we put on ourselves because we're trying to keep up with the Joneses, the proverbial saying. And, and we've talked about this in other podcasts. If you've got a $10,000 car and $1,000 phone, and you've got, really nice, $100 shoes and all this other stuff, you're not doing too bad,
Right.
and you could probably make some sacrifices and have some pretty nice things.
Still, yeah.
Or not have as nice of things and have some money in the bank instead, which may be some better choices. But, there's all these
Right.
competing entities for your time and for your money. And companies spend billions of dollars to influence your choices.
Right.
We can't help but be impacted by that. And it's just something to be aware of, right? None of us are immune to it. And so it's something to be mindful of in our daily activities, in our conversation with others.
Right. Right. And I think finances is one of those things too that couples don't like to talk about.
And one of, so it is my opinion, right? So I hear this a lot lately. You know, my kids are in the public school system. And so I hear a lot of parents say that they wished teachers taught finances and economics in schools better because, families feel like they're broke and impoverished. They feel like they're living paycheck to paycheck. And yet they don't want that for their children. But they're doing that. So, parents want the schools to teach children money and finances and how to do better than what they are, right? So parents don't feel like they're qualified to teach it. So they want teachers. But there's some wisdom in that. And if the parents don't believe that they know something, then somebody that does know that should maybe be the source of information on that. So maybe they should find someone else to teach that. Maybe they're not making the best choices, and so they want better for their children. There's some wisdom in that. But teachers, right, grow up in, generally middle class income families, right? And they don't have a lot of life experience. They go to college to be a teacher, right? They don't learn about finances and they graduate college, right? Maybe they get married, maybe they start having children and stuff, but they're living the normal same lives that we're all living. They're not experts on finances, right? And maybe they know less than the parents do even.
Right.
Right? Maybe they're making poor financial choices. Not always. And this isn't a dig on teachers. Teachers do amazing things, but I don't think it's fair to put all of that on teachers, right? So there are experts out there. There's people like, Dave Ramsey, Robert Kiyosaki, Tony Robbins.
Yeah. And we've talked about that too, is that what you model to your kids is more impactful than what you tell your kids.
Right.
So parents have to be willing to make sacrifices like that too.
Right.
To model the behaviors they want their kids to have rather than just say, yep, I messed up. I do this stupid. You need to do better.
Kids are more likely to do what they observe you doing than anything that you tell them.
That's very true.
And, so I tell my children all the time, first do no harm, always be kind, then have fun. Right. And so, but am I always doing that? Right. So sometimes I may have
and we're both
a bad
guilty
day
of that.
or whatever. Yeah. And so I'm not necessarily always modeling that.
Right. We try very hard.
And if you're having a bad day, children are 100% more likely to pick up on anything that you do during that bad day than anything that you say during any of your good days. And that's just sort of Murphy's Law. I don't even know how that works, but
that's tough. Being a parent is amazing and one of the hardest jobs in the world.
Indeed. So wear a condom.
For real. I love those things where it has the condoms by the diapers.
Right.
And it's like save or compare and save.
I've heard this joke, but I said this a long time ago. I don't know that I'm the originator of it by any means, but I've always said that, the sex ed course in school should always be like a baby crying in the background.
And it smells like puke and poop.
And it smells like bodily fluids all over.
There's toys everywhere, and
you've got to walk across a floor of Legos to get to the baby.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And you can't sleep for 3 days.
Yes.
That should be the sex ed class.
It would be effective.
It would be more realistic.
It might scare kids from having kids at all, though.
It might be the best population control on the planet,
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know. And so, and I wouldn't change it for the world, right? Having kids truly is amazing, right? And part of the reason it's amazing is because there are some really unamazing moments that somehow you get through those and you come out on the other end and you're just like, it's empowering, right? You're like, I did that. I went 3 days without sleep and somehow I managed to keep this little human alive.
Right. When I really
inexplicably
when I really didn't feel like it.
And you come out on the other end and then, they'll smile and they'll for the first time they'll say like, dada or mama. And you're just like,
you melt.
your heart melts and you're just like, that is the most incredible. Like I did that. And there's so many moments like that. And I've learned to enjoy every moment through all the phases
like just
of
watching them
childhood.
finally get
It's
something
incredible.
that you've been
But-
telling them over and over and over. Like,
And so ADHD brain kicks in sometimes. One of the things that I was alluding to earlier when we were discussing this is that Americans in general, and a lot of other countries now too, because we are the world leaders, whether we want to be or not. That is our position in the world right now, and that is why Trump is so beloved around the world, because people are desperate to have a real leader that provide real examples of leadership that gets things done. You may not agree with him, but he's largely trying to do what he says he's going to do, and he does it in a very effective manner. And a politician is trained to say nothing, right? Or to tell you whatever you want to hear, but they don't ever have any intention of actually doing it. And that's sort of the difference as many people see it, right? Roughly 81 million people.
right.
But Americans need to be more intentional with their lives. I see this because I'm divorced, I'm in some divorced dad groups and some men helping men groups and dads helping dads groups. And I see this all the time where I'm on my second marriage. My wife lives in a different home than I do, and she has the kids most of the time. And now, she started seeing someone else, and so we're getting a divorce. And I'm going to move 3 hours away, but I don't want to spend all this money in child support. And there's all these complicated issues that are going on, and my family supports her, and all these, and I shouldn't have said this, and maybe I have a drinking problem. There's all these little nuances, but they can't. They're like, I'm living my life, and all these bad things are happening, and it contributes immensely to the mental health issues that I'm seeing in people today, the anxieties and the stress levels. And if people would just slow down and being intentional, hey, write out a plan for your life. I mean, do this. If you're in, junior high or high school, make a life plan. This is what I want out of life. And if you don't know, that's okay. Then create a plan for how you're going to figure it out.
Right.
I want to travel and explore my life, or I want to try different jobs and see which ones I like, or, make a plan for how you're going to plan.
Right.
And it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to not know. It's not okay to just be completely oblivious and have no plan and not be intentional. Right? So, whatever life hands me.
Well, the victim mentality.
It's a victim mentality.
Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and I can't do anything about it, and it's just whatever.
Right. And there's, the fatalist mentality and all this other thing. Mm-hmm. And yes, God's in charge and God provides. And I'm a firm believer that I have a very, very powerful testimony to that.
I actually just saw something recently.
What'd you see?
It's tied into that fatalist mentality thing. So people tend to get into, anxiety or depression or whatever words you would like to ascribe to it, because they feel so insignificant, feel like they're not going to make any positive change in the world or whatever. And they're like, but if you go and do something small, like make your bed every day. The one particular thing I saw in that was, go knit a sock. So even though you feel like you have no grand contribution, look, I made this. I produced something. I was able to do something. And it just knocks that whole fatalist mentality out the window.
And then you can build on that.
Something.
So then you can make the second sock. And now, right, then you can give that to someone else who needs socks. And you can make a difference in the world. It sounds that simple.
Yeah.
But it really can. And that's absolutely true. That's a really good point. I appreciate that.
It is. And it is just doing those little things. Like, we give people lemon marmalade all the time. And that seems like we have so much of it. That,
It's a love it or hate it thing for most people. Some people are like, ew, no. It's like, okay, well, more for me.
We just have a lot of it because of our food truck, and so that's
When
what we
life
make.
hands you lemons, and sometimes we end up with 2 or 3 cases of lemons after a food truck event, and then we don't have another event
Yeah.
for a month, and they're not going to last. So now we've got to do something.
But to
So
us,
we make
it's an insignificant thing because we have so much of it. But to somebody else, it means a lot. They're like, "Oh my gosh,
Well, they
you
don't
made
have-
this and you gave it to me." And
they don't have the lemons, right? So most people don't go out and buy a case of lemons, and most families don't buy sugar by the 40-pound bags like we do,
Right.
And then have the processing equipment, and then have the canning equipment and the jars and the knowledge to do all this stuff and the time, right? So.
Right.
Generally, people are working, at least one job and raising kids, and that consumes. Those are like raising kids is a full-time job by itself. So they're working 2 full-time jobs between raising a family and having a full-time job that they don't have the time to do all the extra things, right? And maintaining a household and all the other things. So we're very fortunate to
Yes.
be in the position that we're in, and sharing some of our good fortune with others means a lot to people.
It does.
But I think to your point, most people feel insignificant at times, right? They feel like they're not, maybe they feel they're in
Feel like a
dire straits,
failure
or maybe not enough vitamin D, or they've had a particular bad string of things happen in their daily life or at
Yeah.
work, or a challenge in a relationship with a coworker or a neighbor or someone in their family,
Right.
and it's weighing on them, or maybe they've made a bad choice and now they're suffering the consequences of that, and so they feel like a failure. All of us go through those emotions, right, and feeling, and so
Right.
we can either allow them to consume us, and we can allow them to win, or it's there's a lot of videos out there, a lot of advice where it's how you react to those circumstances, right?
Right.
So when life hands us lemons, we end up with 2 cases of lemons. What are we going to, now we've got all these extra lemons that are going to go bad. Do we throw them away, and then we feel like we've wasted all this money and all this produce?
Right.
Or do we make lemon marmalade and limoncello?
Limoncello.
This is amazing. And, make something of it, and then share that with others. And now we've turned a circumstance around and used it as a way to help others.
Right.
And I think it's important. And the other thing I was going to talk to your point is, in our society, we tend to have this trend now where everybody is looking for the magic pill to solve their problems. Oh, if I just take this pill, I'll lose all the weight and I won't have to, diet and exercise and do all the hard stuff. If I just take this pill, I won't be depressed anymore. I'll be happy and it'll be euphoric and kumbaya, et cetera, et cetera. And there is no magic pill. So medications can help. Talk to your doctor, talk to your therapist or psychiatrist and everything. But even therapy, right, is just talking to somebody. So if you talk to your friends and your family or your neighbors, and you have or your spouse, or you're in a relationship, or your kids or your parents or whoever, find somebody you trust, a teacher, a classmate, anybody, and find somebody you trust, and just start with that conversation. Just say, hey, you know what? I've been having some dark thoughts. I've been really feeling bad about things. And
Right.
most people will meet you there and just say, you know what? I've had feelings like that too, but we could do this, and we can do this. And
right. Well, and just choosing to take some of those hardships and take some of those hard feelings, and like, it's a fork in the road. You can go down the fatalist path and be like, everything's awful, the world is horrible, it's never going to get better. Or you can use it as motivation to make things better, or to choose to take those emotions and do something good with it.
So my kids both have a very nurturing, caring heart. All of our kids do.
They do.
And, I think both of us do as well. And I have been able, and I know you have too, been able to help people in very small but very significant ways. Just one piece of advice that's really well timed when they're going through something can make all the difference in the world. You don't have to build them a new house or buy them a new car.
You don't have to fix it for them.
You don't have to fix it for them, right? You just have to give them hope, right? So share one of your experiences that's similar to that and how you got through it, right? And that gives them hope and gives them a direction to get past their thing. If you don't know, maybe you know somebody that knows. And it's
Yeah.
okay to tell them, look, I don't know what I would do in that circumstance too, but I'm here for you. And maybe just having that acknowledgement
Right.
is enough for someone to give them enough strength to get them. They go home, they get some rest, they wake up the next morning, they're like, hey, I've got this.
Right.
And, really small things that we can do to contribute to people's lives it's the butterfly effect, right? Have a huge, significant difference. One little piece of positivity gets magnified over time.
Right.
And so having those positive encouragements, positive interactions with people, and positive pieces of advice rather than doom and gloom and magic fixes and all that kind of stuff, that's not realistic.
Right.
And,
Right.
there are consequences. If you're taking, any type of medication for chronic anything over a long period of time, there are consequences for that. It's not just free
right.
medication, right? So there's a checks and balances, and that's something to be mindful of, right? So if I'm doing this, then what's going to happen long term, and how can I better address that
Right.
to mitigate the risk and to increase my chances for success through all of it. And those are conversations that we're just not having enough because, again, like I said earlier, companies are spending billions of dollars to influence your opinions. They want you addicted. Big pharma, right, wants you addicted to medications because that's how they pay their bills. Right? They can't build a new skyscraper
If you're not taking their medicine.
unless they've got more people on their drugs and keeping them there. Right? They want you addicted to prescription medications. Right?
And it's not just opioids, because that's where a lot of people go, is just being addicted is just like the opioids or, the hardcore medications that people think about. It's not just them.
Right.
It's everything.
Look at the diabetes, right? So there's another chronic illness that's prolific in our society. But yet, if you look at ingredients, right? So there's cornstarch corn syrup, cornstarch. I mean, I have a thing for cornstarch,
You
but
do.
that's another story, another time. Sorry,
Yes.
I misspoke.
Corn syrup.
Syrup is in everything, right? From spaghetti sauce to
breads.
maple syrup, right? Has corn syrup in it. Why? Well, because it's cheaper and it makes it go further, but it's not healthy for you. And
Well, yeah. It's just an additive in so many things. Lunch meats, like you said, spaghetti sauce.
it's in everything.
breads.
So read the labels, look at stuff, but so Americans eat so much sugar and so much sweetener. It's astounding, really. And then all the drinks that you get at the gas station, there's so much sugar in drinks and all that kind of thing. And I am ringing.
You are ringing.
There's my alarm. So we're gonna have to wrap this up, I think. But so to get into our mental health, stuff and having this conversation, but also our physical health and learning to eat healthier, right? So, Robert F.
Yes.
Kennedy Jr.,
Right.
who is now endorsing Trump, right, wants to make America healthy again, right?
Right.
That's part of his change to the MAGA movement kind of thing. And there's a lot of wisdom in that because it's having these conversations about,
Right. Well,
Right.
all the health issues that we've had can be very closely tied to the farming subsidies that brought
Right.
about all the corn syrup.
I remember in the
things
80s when all the farming collapsed, right? And so Willie Nelson, right, lost his farm and lost everything because of the farming crisis and everything else. And the farming community pulled together and helped him save literally his life and his career and his farm. And, they bought all of his stuff back. It was all literally bankruptcy and it was all like being auctioned off. People bought it and gave it back to him, right? It was just immense love and support of how the community pulled together and
Right.
gave it back to him. But they had the hard conversations. But part of the result of all the farming crisis in the 80s was that they started putting corn syrup and everything because then
everything. And
that-
soy.
and yeah, right, and soy, all kinds of stuff, because that way they're forcing the food industry to utilize the products that the farmers are producing, and it provided all these subsidies. It was great for the economy. It was great for
Right.
farmers. It was not great for people's health.
Right.
So now we're suffering the consequences of that. And it's like, well, let's look for a better way. I want to support farmers. Farmers do amazing work. They produce amazing things. There's ethanol fuels. There's all kinds of other stuff that
Right.
we can do with that. It doesn't necessarily have to all just go into our food, right? And maybe farming hemp, which is a superior product in a lot of ways.
Right.
Maybe there's other things that could be produced that would be healthier for us on a mass scale. And
Right.
but let's have these conversations. Let's just not accept things the way they are, or the government's going to fix it for us, right? The government, it works for us, and we need to have these conversations amongst ourselves and figure it out. There's a lot of old guys that sit around the coffee shop and have conversations still yet today.
Right.
And they're talking about whatever, their kid's birthday and the soccer game last night or football game last night and all these little things. But they're also sharing, oh, yeah, hey, at the farming thing, I've been doing this and it's been working really well.
Right.
They're sharing pertinent information, little small pieces of positive advice that have that butterfly effect and make a difference. So
Right.
I think we need to get back to neighborhood parties, getting together with people and having harder conversations and sharing knowledge with people to make the world a better place and get away from some of the things that we've become succumbed to
Yeah.
over the course of time.
Yeah.
So with that, we have to go, but we'll see you in the open air.
Bye.